Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
It is certainly my privilege and my honor to be able to chat with you for a few minutes today. I feel that I'm among friends because many of you have been supporters of the Brightside Church and the Brightside Opportunity Center over the years. And as I depart this wonderful community, my plea to you is that you will continue your support in what I believe to be some very important ventures. I've been asked to share a little bit about my life, and I'm honored to be able to do that. And I do that in the reference of the city and county of Lancaster, which is my home. I'm a native of this area. As you've heard, I went through the Lancaster School District and graduated from McCaskey, and then my bachelor's from Franklin and Marshall, master's from Lancaster Bible College, and a doctor of ministry from Lancaster Theological Seminary. And those were all significant areas and times in my life. But I'd really like to kind of concentrate for a few minutes and share what was developmental for me, kind of the seedbed of my life. Grandson of a slave, Stephen Brown, son of Louis Alexander Butcher Sr., father of Louis Alexander Butcher III, and grandfather of Louis Alexander Butcher IV. So we try to keep things going. 74 years old, married to Katie Rogers for 51 years, father of 4, grandfather of 7, great-grandfather of 5. Have had since I had an email, and I'm trying to think back how many years that may have been. I've had several emails, but my main email address has been myblessedlife@AOL.com. And the reason I chose My Blessed Life is because, indeed, I believe that my life has been extremely blessed. All of the things that I've been privileged to be a part of over the years, all of the challenges and all of the good days and all of the bad days, I believe, have been influenced greatly by my development as a youth, the wonderful people that I was blessed to encounter, those that came alongside me and were willing to help me as an African-American youth growing up in the 40s and the 50s. And I have an eternal debt to many of those people, most of whom have already passed off the scene. Some of you here today who may be contemporary or a bit older than I am will remember Lancaster in the 40s and the 50s. I was a war baby, born in 1943. And I would submit to you that things were quite different back then than they are today. Downtown Lancaster was the hub of commerce, kind of for the county, and an extremely exciting place where people gathered. Diversity was not nearly as extensive as it is today in Lancaster City and County, and it was, as far as racial and ethnic composition is concerned, it was just mostly African Americans and the majority population of whites. And everything that took place downtown for me and my family was kind of linked to what was taking place in the 7th Ward where we all lived. there was really, while there was, of course, not legal segregation, there was de facto segregation in those days, and the majority, the vast majority, if not exclusive majority of African Americans lived in what was later termed the southeast section of Lancaster, or the southeast area of Lancaster, but what is really the 7th Ward of Lancaster. It was called the ward in a very pejorative way because many people felt that it was crime-ridden and that the people there were of little value. Now, of course, that was not universal, but that was part of what the thought pattern was. And the way we were influenced as kids were to have excursions outside of the 7th Ward, as well as things that were taking place within those blocks of the 7th Ward. And quite frankly, where African Americans lived was not even the full extent of the 7th Ward. It was really basically a few central blocks. And I've been honored to be a part of a group of 7 now that is writing a history of the 7th Ward of Lancaster between the years of 1930 and 1980. I want you to visualize with me what downtown Lancaster was in those days. The main areas of commerce were Queen Street, north and south, and King Street, east and west. There were no shopping centers at the time, and people, I suspect from the county as well as from the city, came in town to shop. The stores were open 6 days a week, closed on Sunday because of the blue laws, often closed between 1 and 3. Sometimes some stores not open on Mondays, but most of the stores, if not all, were open on Friday evenings. And that was a joy for my 2 sisters and myself because we were permitted to go downtown. My mother allowed us to go down, my older sister, my younger sister, and myself. And we were privileged to window shop. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with window shopping, that means you don't buy anything, you just look in the windows. But how gratifying was that for wide-eyed kids from the 7th Ward? It was amazing. Downtown was thriving with department stores, Hager's and Garvin's and Watt and Shan. There were the national chains were actually downtown. J.C. Penney's and Sears were on East King Street. And then there were what we call the 5 and Dimes, or the 5 and 10 stores. There was Woolworth's and Green's and McCroy's. And we liked McCroy's particularly because you could go into the store from 2 different streets. There was an entrance on East King Street, but there was also an entrance on North Queen Street. And it also had more significance for my sisters and I than that, because there was a lunch counter or a soda fountain in the basement. And on Fridays, if we were good kids, my mother allowed us to go and have supper downtown at McCroy's. She gave my older sister $1 and said, "You guys can eat downtown." Now, don't be mistaken. She didn't give $1 for each of us. She gave $1. And you'll say, what can you do with $1? Well, maybe you won't say that, but my grands and great-grands do when I give them $1. What am I supposed to do with this, Pop-Pop? But we would go, and we would be able to get a 10-cent hot dog apiece, 10-cent fries, a nickel Coke in a real glass that had Coca-Cola on it. That came to 75 cents. There was no sales tax, and my mother expected a 25-cent return when we got home. Wow. But it was an extremely wonderful experience. Things were going on as I was growing up and that helped to mold me. In the post-war era, the Cold War, if you will, there was Conelrad. Some of you will remember Conelrad. it was the radio stations that broadcast whether there was going to be a nuclear attack or not. And it would say, tune in to 640 or 1240 on your radio dial. And then they assured us that if there was a nuclear attack, that we would be able to survive it. And we even were taught in school that if we were to survive a nuclear attack, we had to duck and cover. And that meant you got under your desk. And I would suggest to you that it was an incredible way to survive a nuclear blast with a sonic boom, with radiation everywhere. If we were only able to get under our desk, we had it made. And so that was downtown Lancaster. As a kid, it was wonderful for me because around Christmas time, there was a store on East King Street called Farmer Supply. And they had the most incredible train layout that a kid would ever want to see. I mean, they had 7 or 8 trains that were always running around Christmas. And then at Wat & Shan, right after Thanksgiving, and Christmas didn't start in July back then, it started the day after Thanksgiving, Santa Claus would come to town and in the center square with a little parade, and all the kids would gather around, and a fire truck would put a ladder up to the 4th floor of Wat & Shan, and Santa Claus would climb up, and we'd be able to tell him all the things that we wanted. And the downtown was an incredible experience. And I'm glad that I was able to be a part of that. Even then, there was the Ground Observers Corps. And back then, the radar was not as sophisticated as it is now. So believe it or not, people climbed to the top of the Grice building with binoculars to see if they could observe any enemy planes ready to attack Lancaster. I would submit to you that if planes got that far inland, wow. But that was all part of what was going on then. It was a day of innocence. I can also remember my mother, my parents, they were cutting edge. They enjoyed having us do things that were informative. And when television was first introduced to Lancaster, there were 3 large sets in the lobby of the Grice building. We were able to see those. And then in 1949, the Steinman family founded WGAL-TV, and it was the 4th station established in Pennsylvania, the only one outside of the 3 that were in Philadelphia, and it was Channel 4. And that was 49, about 1952, my parents were able to purchase a used television set. And, it didn't broadcast all night. Obviously, it was all black and white. I can still remember some of the commentators on there. And at around 11 o'clock, after the 11 o'clock news, there was the Star Spangled Banner, and then there was test patterns for the rest of the evening. But the incredible thing about the TV that we had was this. It created community on our street. There were some folks that didn't even speak to us. But when they found out we had TV, all of a sudden they were bosom buddies and great friends. And on Friday nights, there was the Friday night fights, and even Mr. Fry from up the street, Mr. Jim, who never darkened the door of our house, knocked on the door to see if everything was okay on Friday night. And my dad said, "It's fine. Jim, why don't you come in and watch TV?" "Really? You want me to?" And it was great. Being a kid in Lancaster had its ups and had its downs. We were in a neighborhood in the 7th Ward that was in transition. It was primarily white, but it was also a strong Jewish population there. Temple Degel Israel, which is now on Columbia Avenue, was located on Chester Street in the heart of the southeast area. It's my understanding that it's an Orthodox temple, and so when Degel Israel moved to Columbia Avenue, many of the families began to transition out of the 7th Ward to move closer to the temple. And many of my friends growing up were Jewish and white. The street I lived on was integrated. And the fact of the matter is that everybody seemed to get along. There were very few, if any, pretentious people in the community because nobody seemed to outdo each other. And what I didn't know until I got into high school was the reason nobody was upset with each other or pretentious was we were all poor. I didn't know we were poor until I read the statistics when I got into high school. I said, oh my God, I grew up poor. But everybody was poor and we all looked out for each other. It was a time, believe it or not, when folks really did knock on each other's door and borrow a cup of sugar. That really did happen, believe it or not. And in the neighborhood in which I lived, nobody locked their doors at night. You hear those as urban legends, but it was absolutely true. Except for one family, the Butcher family. We locked our door. Well, there was only one door. There were two doors. We locked the inside door. But we put the key above the transom, and everybody in the neighborhood knew where the key was. So if they needed to get in, that wasn't a problem, just because we locked the door. And we got along. And I was shaped immeasurably by the people and the heroes that I met in those days in Lancaster, in the 7th Ward. The two places that we were really permitted to go without supervision was the Crispus Attucks Community Center and the Boys Club. It was not yet Boys and Girls Club. And people like Ruby Payne Cook, who was the director of the Crispus Attucks Center, who influenced hundreds, if not thousands of young people, was there to set a moral standard, but also to motivate and to encourage. And she taught us that we were not second-class citizens and that we could achieve and accomplish anything we set our minds to with the help of God. And the funny thing about it is we believed her. And it was a good, wholesome experience. Many kids had very little money, and there was no cafeteria at school. And so during lunch hour, and we got an hour to go and eat, some kids went home, but a lot of kids went to Crispus Attucks, and there Mrs. Jackson, Ethel Hal Jackson, was the one that would prepare meals, and they cost a dime or 15 cents or maybe a quarter, and if you didn't have it, you ate anyway. And there was a real sense of community. And then the late Sherman Hill was director of the Boys Club. And all the kids there, all the guys there, knew that there was somebody in the community that cared about them. And it was important, the fact that he didn't really look like us ethnically, but he was really concerned. And he taught us that we needed to be fair, we needed to play well, and we needed to play with each other in a very fair fashion. And he also was one who commanded respect. I was fortunate once I got into college to be able to have a work scholarship and be able to work at the Boys Club to really further not only my academic education, but my social interaction education, and that all happened through working at the Boys Club. Churches were very, very important for us, and the influence of church, of course, impacted me. My father was a pastor. He was a Baptist pastor. My mother was a devout Christian woman. They were extremely strict on their kids. There was no doubt in their minds that if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. The things that they did back in the 40s and 50s, if they were doing those things today, they would be sentenced to 3 to 5 years for child abuse. But I'm here today, 70-some years later, none the worse for wear and better off because my folks decided that it was important to meet a standard. My parents pushed us. There was no question as to whether I'd go to college. My sisters, it was just a matter of where and what we were going to do to prepare to do that. And my mother wanted us to be more cosmopolitan than just getting a good education. So she insisted that we take piano lessons. And I had some of the finest teachers. Miss Grube at Lancaster, it later became Lancaster Conservatory of Music, it was Lancaster Studio of Music, and Mary Bainbridge, who was there at the time. And they taught us those sonatas and sonatinas, and I had to learn the scales and all of that. And that was wonderful, I guess, for somebody else. But when I sat at the piano, there was the guys in my neighborhood, they played street football. And I had to sit at a piano and learn my scales while I would glance out the window and see the arc of a great football pass going by the window. And obviously, my heart was in the street and not at the piano. And so one day, my mother had a heart-to-heart talk. She said, "Son, you're wasting your father's hard-earned money." She said, "I want you to go to your room and decide whether you want to take piano lessons or not." And I said, "That's great. I don't have to go to my room, but I will in deference to my mother." And I went there for 15 or 20 minutes, and I came down there with my most serious face. I said, "Mother, thank you. I never want to waste my father's money. So I have decided that I want to discontinue piano lessons." And she said, "Now let me get you straight. You're gonna play, sit down, and get it done now." That wasn't the only thing. My mother was a terrorist. We had neighborhood barbershops, and I went to the barbershop, and there, the older fellas, they were the sages of the community. Everybody learned. There were the newspapers, but then the true wisdom, the true knowledge came from barbershops and beauty salons in the neighborhood. And so I sat under these elders. Of course, as kids, we could not talk. As a matter of fact, in our barbershop, didn't matter what place you were in. If an older person came in, they would inform you they were going to take your spot. Sometimes they would give you a dime, but most of the time they would tell you your parents raised you to understand that you respect your elders, which was just a cop-out. They wanted to take your place. But I heard them distinctly say, "Now I'm going to tell you what makes those boys into sissies. It's the fact that they got to do dishes, and it's just wrong." Yes. So I couldn't wait to get home, and I informed my mother. "Mother, guess what makes little boys sissies? It's doing dishes. So I don't want to do dishes anymore. So can you give my nights to my sisters?" She said, "I'm only going to say this once." So today I have dishpan hands. My father pastored a small church up in Kenoi Township in a little quarry town called Billmeyer. It's not there today. It got washed away in the flood that accompanied Hurricane Agnes in 1972. But some of my most cherished years were spent there. His church was small, maybe 30 or 40 members. To this day, I've maintained some friendships, although many of the people that were there have passed away. It was the quintessential company town. I'm actually writing a history of it now, particularly about the African American community, because most of the workers were African Americans that had been brought to Lancaster County from Louisa County, Virginia. And in many cases, and it's not necessarily an indictment of the company, but in many cases it was very sad because the people had very low wages, and the road up to 441 was about 2 miles, and the only recreation they had was to spend a dime or a quarter and pay somebody who had a car to ride up to the road and back. That was something special for them. And there was a railroad train that ran through, and there was a company store, and most of the workers had a tab, and by the end of the month or the end of the week or bi-weekly, whenever they settled, most of the money that they were earning went to the owner of the store. But I established some wonderful friendships. As a matter of fact, I brag about my one friend, Robert White. Some of you that are R&B devotees may recognize the fact that he was a funk brother. As a matter of fact, those of you that are familiar with the classic song by The Temptations, My Girl, the riff at the beginning is my friend Robert White, one that I grew up with in my dad's church in a little town in Kenoi Township. But those people had pure faith. They believed always that God was looking out for them. I was baptized behind the church in the Susquehanna River. And that impacted my spiritual life. And I heard testimonies of people who did not have it easy, people who did not have great health care, people who were poor most of their lives. But they said, Louis or Sonny, as I was called as a kid, you know what? You can be something great. You can be something that we could not be. Just hold on to God's unchanging hand, listen to your parents, and do the very best that you can. And I will never forget the blessings of those folks there. My time is winding down. There's so much more I'd love to tell you. But growing up in Lancaster City, things and times were different. We all hung out at the playground at Green and Rockland. We called it Jesse's Playground. And we were so crazy, we'd play football without pads, not touch, tackle. And no lawsuits, no helmets. And we'd play basketball, and I was a basketball devotee, and we played 3-on-3, and it's if you win, you stay on the court. And there were many a day in the summer where I'd play all day, right through lunch and on toward the end of the day. 7th Ward was a vibrant place. Duke Street was the hub of activity. There were black businesses, there were Jewish businesses. Right there in a 4-block radius, linear 4 blocks, there were 2 pharmacies, there were several barbershops, beauty salons, there was a supermarket, there were restaurants, there were corner stores, and right on the street where I lived was a place called Hattie's Sub Shop, and Hattie made the best subs you could ever want to eat. Mostly onions, but they tasted great. And that's where we grew up. And everybody knew each other. As a matter of fact, you talk about the African proverb of a village raising kids. It existed in the 7th Ward of Lancaster. The school I went to, E.E. Higbee, it's no longer there. It was replaced by Martin Luther King. It was on Rockland and Dolphin Streets, and I lived on Green between Christian and Duke. And so walking home, we had to turn the corner on Duke onto Green. And I called it Murderer's Row because there were families there, the Baylesses, the Means, the Snows, the Gentrys. And if you were acting up or cutting up till you got to Green Street, you had to be angelic walking from Duke to the end of the street where my home was, because everybody was sitting out and everybody was watching. And if you made a mistake, a phone call preceded you. And even if it was a party line, let me tell you what a party line is. You digital folks, a party line is where there's more than one person on your line, and they have a dial phone. Okay, a dial phone is... But they would clear the party line and tell my mother, he's acting, and by the time I got home, there was no judicial prudence. My mother believed everything somebody told them about us, and if we were not punished by the people on the street on the way down, we were punished when we got home. But it helped us to develop character. And to this day, I thank God for them. I was an entrepreneur at about 12, had a paper route, carried papers and delivered them door to door. How novel is that? In many communities, that never happens anymore. But I got to meet people, and I did all kinds of jobs growing up. Never hurt me. I worked on a farm harvesting tobacco. I cut grass. I did all kinds of different chores just to understand what it was like to earn my own money and to carry out the work ethic, which was very important in our home. And so today, I'm very blessed by those who preceded me, who were role models for me, who looked beyond my shortcomings and weaknesses and saw something that they thought might be developed into a person of character and worth. We spent our time on the corner not plotting the robbery of a convenience store, which didn't exist in those days, but corner stores did. But we stood there and we sang and we harmonized. I can remember when the first marijuana came into our community. People returned from the Korean War, and maybe they had experienced drugs, but they never gave it to the kids. And we were wholesome, and it was fun. And my dream is that in the future, maybe, just maybe, kids, the millennials and their kids, will return to an era of innocence where people got along, people loved God, and they loved each other. And that's why I have the email address, My Blessed Life. Thanks.